Hey friends, welcome back to Huge Head Studio. My name is Robbie, and this week we're continuing our series on the middle-aged Mutant Ninja Turtles with the meanest and greenest turtle of them all, Raphael. So let's recap. So far in my version of the middle-aged Mutant Ninja Turtles, we've made Leo the responsible one. Older Leo is still sporty, still disciplined, and absolutely destined to coach Little League whether the kids like it or not. Then we made Donny the smart one. He's still a tech nerd who ironically has the entire turtle layer wired up with smart home voice commands, but refuses to trust Alexa or Siri because they're always listening. Then we have Mikey. We'll get to Mikey next time, but today is Raph. Raphael has always been the tough one, the hothead, the guy who punches first and reflects never. And I imagine that doesn't exactly soften with age. If anything, he probably grows into a full-blown, hey kid, get off my lawn type. The kind of guy who insists he could still take anyone in a fight even though he grunts and groans every time he stands up out of a chair. I mean, he's basically just Uncle Rico. He's mentally stuck in his glory days. And even though his body has started its slow slide down the wrong side of the rainbow that is life, he's still full of fury and fire. Though, at this age, some of that fire just shows up as heartburn. So if you've watched the other turtle videos, you already know the process. And if you haven't, well, go watch them. There should be a link popping up somewhere around here, and it's in the description below. And while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss Mikey whenever we finally get around to him and see what half a life's worth of pizza has done to him. But for Raph, we're following the same basic process as the other two. Everything's just a little thicker and a little more busted. Years of being the tank of the group has left his shell and the rest of his body pretty worn down, so I added some cracks and scratches to the shell to show that mileage and then threw on a bit of athletic tape like he's just trying to keep the worst of it held together. Next up are the hands and the sai. Originally I planned to sculpt the sai out of clay, but they just look too soft, so instead I cut down some wooden dowels and then sharpened them with a pencil sharpener to get a clean point and then attached them to a small roll of clay using bacon bond before tossing them in the oven. Once they cooled, I sanded the edges to round them out a bit and then wrapped the handles in athletic tape, partly to give them some character and partly to hide any flaws in my design. I then snipped one of the points to imply some more wear and tear as if it were snapped off in a fight long ago, and then wrapped the fingers around the prongs because I feel like this hold looks more like he's using the sai as a weapon and not trying to be a weekend grill master. After that, we move on to the turtle belly, which I make with Super Sculpey because it's much firmer and will hold the smooth finish that I want for the belly. I add some scratches and damage to make it fit the rest of the body and then peel it back because his chest just looked too flat. As I said before, Raph is the tank, so naturally he's bigger and thicker than his brothers. But I imagine his experience will be a lot like my own, where the muscle slowly softens over time, and even though he's still built and strong, the muscle now has a nice, soft, protective covering over it. Which means he's fat. Raph is getting fat. But even though he's put on a little weight, I don't see him ever skipping arm day. It's the one muscle group you can easily work from a lazy boy, so I bulked them up more than the other turtles with thicker forearms and heavier biceps. Not in like a superhero comic book or magazine cover kind of way, but more like a dense, strong dad bod look. And while Donny had a long, skinny tech neck, McThickums here might as well not have a neck at all as I build up his traps to look nice and beefy in an attempt to make the body shape look consistent and intentional and not all wonky. With the body mostly done, I'm ready to move on to his head, so I build up the beak and blend it together just as I did with the other turtles, and then I compare it to Leo to see if the proportions match and make sure they look like they belong together on the shelf. But unlike the other turtles, I'm giving Raph an open mouth snarl, mostly because I want to knock out a couple of his teeth. If any of the brothers were going to lose a few chiclets over the years, it's definitely this guy. But I also want the expression to feel like he's just trying a little too hard to be intimidating. Because even though we've been talking about him as this big, rough, tough guy, I actually think that as he gets older, he might be the one who softens the most. I could 100% see him turning into the sentimental one, the guy who pretends he doesn't care but absolutely does. So now there's a gap between how he feels and how he wants to be seen. He still thinks he has to look intense and scary, even if deep down he's a quiet softie who just refuses to admit it. So that is the thought process behind this look. As for the mask covering his whole head rather than just his eyes, the thought process there is, I just like it. There are plenty of logical reasons why he wears it this way, but mine is simply I like it. So I cut a few tears into it and poked and jabbed at the tears to make the edges look frayed and make the mask look worn and experienced. Once the head was done, I added it and the shell to the body and then used some liquid Sculpey to add some scars and then threw it all in the oven to bake before adding his accessories. The accessories in this series have been a fun way to show the personalities of each turtle. Like Leo wore classic gear that was a little grungy but well maintained with a simple button for his favorite team as decor. Donny wore updated gear and tech that he decorated with a few nerdy pins and buttons, as well as a GoPro and a tiny little Squirtle keychain. Mikey, well, I'm saving him for last for a reason, but for Raph, I'm going for something closer to Leo's look, just with less discipline. Raph's gear has to look like Raph, old, crusty, and beat to hell. So I made him a leather harness similar to the one that Leo wore, but Leo's was a little plain. If there's one thing I'd add to it to make it look a bit more believable, it'd be some buckles. But now Leo's sculpture is already done and I'm far too lazy to go back and fix it, so I figured I'd just add the buckles here on Raph instead. So I took some little strips of armature wire, bent them to shape, and pressed them into the straps with a tiny bit of bacon bond to hold them into place. After that, I made some little holsters for his sai and glued them into place on the harness, and then took a strip of clay and tied it into a knot to make the mask knot and tails. Then I poked and scratched some weathering into one of the tails to suggest it tore long ago. I secured the whole thing to the back of his head with a piece of wire and a bit of bacon bond, and then spent a few minutes fiddling with the tails until they sat in a way that actually looked aesthetically pleasing. Then I added a few decorations to his harness, and with that, the sculpt is done and we are ready to paint. Just like with the other turtles, I started the paint with a fast and loose coat of darker green, no primer, just straight onto the baked white clay. From there, I build up the color little by little, working from dark to light as I blend in layer after layer of slightly lighter green onto the high points to push the contrast and imply depth with the muscles. To lighten the green, I don't add white. Rarely ever is that a good idea, as it washes out the color and it makes it look dull and kinda chalky. Instead, I add a bit of yellow to the mix to lighten the green, which works much better. After that, I use a stiff bristle brush to make a big ol' mess and flick a dark green wash and then a yellowish wash onto his skin, which helps break up the flat paint even further and gives the skin a little more texture and character. Next, I highlight the scars here and there to make them stand out from the surrounding skin, and then I start doodling a tattoo that Raph got a long time ago. The kind he probably still thinks is the most badass thing ever, or maybe he has grown to quietly regret. I wondered what kind of corny 90s or early 2000s tattoo Raph would get, and I settled on a tribal-looking turtle over a classic, corny barbed wire. Don't get me wrong, I'm not judging. I actually know this feeling all too well. I myself am covered in tattoos, and I may or may not have one or two I'm not too fond of, but as dumb as they may look, they tell my story, and I have no regrets. Anyway, I give the shell and turtle belly a loose coat of raw sienna and then stipple on a coat of yellow ochre to give it some texture before applying a coat of red to his mask and to the wraps on his sai and to the sweatband on his arm, because these turtles have their color of choice and they are dedicated to it. After that, I apply a series of reddish-brown washes, working the color into the recessed areas and then wipe it away from the surface. The purpose of the wash is to push the shadows a little deeper and to make the mask look a little grungy to help it appear old and worn. Then I apply some lighter red to the edges of the frayed fabric and to the other high points the light might catch to push the contrast a little further. Next, I lightly brush on an off-white creamish color onto the teeth. Keeping the pressure light prevents the brush from working its way into the cracks that I want to stay black. I apply the same cream color to the eyes and then dab on a black pupil and a dramatic expression because again, he's trying too hard to look tough. From there, I add some metallic paint to the sai and then brush on a few fast and loose layers of brown onto the harness to try to give it an old, cracked, and worn leather look. Then I dry brush on a lighter grayish brown around the edges and to all the little frayed bits to add to the wear and tear and then give the same treatment to the bands of the elbow pads. From there, I kinda just jump around adding a few washes and accents where needed. I use a brown wash on the arm wraps to give them a bit of grunge and then apply an off-white paint to the athletic tape on the shell before giving it the same grungy wash as the tape on the arms. I also add darker washes into the recesses of the cracks on the shell to help them stand out a bit more and then add some rust and other funk to all the metal pieces. After that, I add an iris and pupil to the eye before finishing up with a little sentimental piece. I like to imagine it's a little craft or something that Mikey made for him when they were young and the big softy keeps it on him at all times. And with that, Raph is done and aged and ready to join his brothers on the shelf. Well, this series is almost wrapped up with just one more to go, which is my favorite of them all, so be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with this series as well as all the other weird ideas that I come up with. But that is all for now, so as always, I appreciate your time and I'll see you on the next one, but in the meantime, be sure to stay creative and make something fun. Thanks for watching.